Welcome to another episode of ReproducibiliTea. I'm Sophia, and today I'm joined by Jan Vonhagen and Sam Parsons.
Hello.
Who are respectively in Germany and the Netherlands today, I think. Yeah.
Yep.
And
I'm back on the bad internet.
Hooray, Germany!
Yeah.
It's such a... Anyway, that could be a topic for another episode. No.
That would be a rant.
That would just be a rant about our different internet providers. But yeah, today we aren't talking about German internet, though that would be fun for everyone involved. We're talking about conferences. The title of this episode is Conferences, Yay or Nay. So Jan and Sam, conferences, yay or nay?
Should I start?
Yeah, you go.
Go ahead.
With the more middle of the road opinion. So I kind of like conferences for the most part. After a conference, I want to lock myself into a room for a week, but mostly I kind of enjoy them. But also the conferences where we go to in human-computer interaction, for us it is the main academic output. We submit our papers to the conferences, and then at the conference you kind of get this barrage of the most topical research that is literally published with the conference. So it is a very nice condensed way to get, I guess, most of the important research in the field. And it's a really nice victory lap, right? You get a paper accepted, you get it published, and you're together with all the other people who got their paper published, and it's kind of really nice. I found. So conferences like that, I kind of like and enjoy.
So overall, it's a yay from you, or it's a yay with conditions?
Yeah. I mean, there are conditions which I think we will get. There are many conditions which I think we will get to. But overall, I like at least some conferences and think they're valuable.
Sounds good. Okay, Sam, conferences, yay or nay?
I probably fall closer to the nay camp. I do agree that they're useful for some things. And I have been to some that I've very much enjoyed and got a lot out of and learnt a lot and gained collaborations from and all of the good things that I think we could talk about conferences for. But I think also, as we'll touch on throughout, there are lots of downsides or issues or inequalities that come with conferences that I think the reason why I fall much closer to the nay is because I think in general there are alternatives that I feel like we could probably achieve most, if not all, of the same goals, but in a better, more equitable, more environmentally friendly kind of way. And I guess for context, the conferences I've been to in general are much more of the standard. You have 2, 3, 4 hour and a half, 2 hour long symposia a day where I mostly, however interested I am, start to fall asleep sitting in the back because it's 4 or 5 kind of talks in a row. You have keynotes, which are cool if you're interested and you like the keynote speaker, but if you don't, then great, you get free time. And then it's kind of like, well, I could have free time at home. And maybe this is exacerbated by lockdowns, et cetera, but I think that's maybe also why we wanted to talk about this as well, because conferences feel like they mean something very different over the last couple of years, and also now that there's a kind of a very big push to pretend everything's everything's like it was 5 years ago, and let's proceed as normal. How about you, Sophia? Where do you sit?
Well, yeah, in a way this worked out perfectly because I think I'm somewhere in between. I'm not quite in the yay camp, but I'm also not quite in the nay camp. So I see the downsides that Sam mentioned. And even without conferences in the fields that I'm sort of in creating the same kind of outputs as in Jan's case, I see a lot of benefits from going to conferences so I'm basically not convinced that can be recreated in another form. Yeah, and so like I think individually, if someone came up to me and asked me, should I go to a conference, this conference, I'd probably say if it's something that's of interest to them, that they should go as long as they get someone else to pay it. Well, assuming this is an ECR who doesn't, who needs to find funding for this, or in general, also any academic. Like, I don't think you should be paying your own money, using your own money to go to conferences. And so that's the individual side. But then on the systemic side of things, that's obviously super problematic if the conferences don't provide funding and people have different access to funding to go to conferences, right? Like all of these inequalities that Sam talked about. So that's why I'm kind of in between. Like, I think it's an unfair system, but I also really, really enjoy conferences, and I think they can be really, really great for lots of different reasons. So,
do you guys think this inequality has improved? No, the equality is the thing that should improve, and that equality has improved during Corona and like when everything shifted to online conferences, and we might now continue to see online or at least hybrid offerings.
and so if this is online conferences, yay or nay, it's a strong nay from me, to be honest. Like, I can see how in theory that works, but in practice, it just doesn't, because you cannot take the same time out of your day to go to an online conference that you can to go to a real life conference. And obviously, real life conferences are super hard for people who have the kind of responsibilities that mean that it is very difficult for them to take that time out to go to the real life conferences. So, right, it's not easy, but I personally have not gotten even close to, well, no, really, like, I have not gotten much out of online conferences, especially when compared to real life conferences. I think a lot of the added value from in-person conferences comes from you kind of going to different talks that you might not have sat in front of a laptop to, like, for like, kind of thing. From the coffee breaks in between, the chats over lunch, whatever, right? All of these things that you really just cannot create in an online format.
Yeah, and I had now had one official hybrid conference, Chi 22, which was in New Orleans. And like prior and very quietly, they shrunk down the hybrid aspect of it, because originally they wanted to have this whole virtual pre-conference and then basically have a second conference mostly in person. But then they just did like this parallel, so really hybrid, and it was a miserable experiences. Like, they required you to have 3 different programs running. Like, most of the social stuff happened on Discord, and then you had this weird conference website that mostly then hosted YouTube streams, and none of the streams were working. And when you were watching, you were more or less completely isolated, and sometimes just ignored by the hosts, who had a lot of shit going on. So no blame on them, and no blame on the student volunteers who had the miserable task of dealing with all the IT. But yeah, it was the online, the hybrid portion was completely pointless in that case. Also, it still cost like $150. Luckily not me paying. And I think all of the virtual stuff then went on to like public YouTube a week after. So there was absolutely no point for me to pay the to like pay the virtual fee. That might
wild.
improve. Yeah, it might improve if they get more used to it. But then again, at least virtual conferences, they now had 2 years to practice. So I was shocked how bad that ran. But maybe, hybrid, only virtual, that might be a different beast again.
Yeah, hybrid's definitely, it's just a wild thing that I feel like there probably is a way to make it work, but I'm also not convinced it would look anything like what we think a conference looks like, which I think is also kind of my perspective as well, that I think if we think we're trying to recreate a conference that we would have been to 5 years ago, we're kind of doomed to fail in a way as well. Like, I like the idea of a virtual space that you can walk around in and talk to people. It didn't help me anything that I've been to, because it's in some ways even worse for socially awkward people to be like, oh, I'm going to move my little avatar up to join this conversation. It's like, okay, cool. But it still has that
Just wait for the
same...
metaverse.
Oh, yes. Oh, goody.
But Sam, you said you were convinced. Oh god, yeah, the metaverse, fantastic. But yeah, Sam, you said you were more convinced of the new ways of doing conferences.
I think
so. Do you want to sell them to us? You've been suspiciously quiet.
No, I think there's a lot of aspects of conferences that could nicely be recreated. So I have been to a few kind of poster style sessions that in my view worked just as well as in-person conferences. Again, it kind of relied on a virtual space, and it relied on having speakers kind of virtually present. But to me, it had the same discussion aspect, as well as the same a few posters left with the speaker standing completely alone for an hour and a half. So like we can also recreate the isolating sad parts of conferences quite well virtually, which is great. I think partly it's just I'm not convinced that some aspects that we think of conferences doing well, I don't think they do well in the first place. So like disseminating knowledge is great, but what knowledge is it? What stage is it at? So like Jan's conferences sound great because it's the main output, so it's kind of where people in the field are going to get that brand new knowledge. Like these are going to be the papers. This is what's new. Whereas at many other conferences, it's kind of like, okay, so is this work in progress? Is this? I mean, you submitted the abstract 6 months ago, so maybe it's. I mean, let's not kid ourselves that peer reviews that quick. But maybe it's already been submitted and under review. So in that case, are you actually after feedback? Are you after sharing the work? Like, it's very ambiguous what stage it's at, which to me then creates this kind of weird... I mean, how many talks have we been to where there's been no questions, right? So then it's not about getting feedback on your work if the understanding is that you don't get questions, basically, for most things.
So that you mentioned peer review, for me, it is that quick, because since we are on this conference circle, you submit 3 months, a month, 1.5 months later, a set time later, you have your peer review, and then you have a chance to either revise or kind of wait till next year. But our papers are out half a year after we submit them, if they get accepted. So compared to what I heard from psychology, that is great.
Yeah.
So, an added bonus to our system, I guess.
And that to me is where it works, right? I mean, you've got the output as part of the conference, so you are presenting work that's going to be an output. The whole idea about this being like the novel work that people need to know about, sort of, it really rings true, I think. I'm not convinced that in this, I'll say standard for want of a better word, I'm not convinced that that's the way that it normally is in conferences, but maybe I'm just down on conferences in general, and that's...
Yeah, I think standard is doing quite a lot of work, right? Like standard in psychology. I do think we might have to talk about what kinds of conferences we've been to, what kind of kinds of conferences there are.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I guess in psychology, I mean, I would like to say like in some other sciences maybe, but I don't know. But in psychology, you do, I think I've only ever been to 2 actual substantive psychology conferences. Yeah. And it seemed like for both of them, I had the experience that it wasn't that work in progress type of stuff. They were papers that by that point had been accepted somewhere or had even already been published. And it was kind of like a victory lap, but in a way that, that Jan mentioned, but not in a way that you could still give any feedback, because it was all, I mean, the studies were done, right? So at best you can give feedback on the discussion. So, and I guess that makes it difficult.
It's kind of advertising at this point, right?
Yeah. And so then like equity-wise, it gets really bad, right? Because if it's really just advertising and you're giving more advertising space to the labs that are probably already more likely to be published in the higher impact factor journal, then what's the point? But I guess in other fields that's different, right? So in the sort of meta-sciencey space, we've had some different ways of approaching this. In philosophy of science, I think obviously because it's different because it's like mostly people thinking very hard about stuff rather than doing studies that you then can't change anymore. It seems like it has much more of that work in progress type of feel where, people even thank the participants of seminars or conferences for giving, for discussing that paper with them in the resulting publication. And then I guess it's more difficult to see how, like, if you could properly recreate that kind of added value in another format, or that, it's easier to see that conferences do something if you're either discussing work in progress or if you're maybe even if you go as far as an ideal version of the SIPS conference, which I'm not sure if that exists anymore either, but yeah.
Is it worth describing what the SIPS conference is for those that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, God damn it. Giving me work. That wasn't my intention. The Society for the Improvement of Psychological Science conference.
Well done.
Is more of a working meeting, I guess. So while there are a few talks, it's much less based around kind of a normal conference, I guess, of lots of people give talks and posters, etc. And it's more about disseminating work. And a lot of it's more kind of working meetings to try and figure out solutions, to try and work on a particular project, to try and build the collaborations, to try and kind of do all of those aspects that I think is also what a lot of us say the benefit of conferences are, kind of building networks, etc., etc. But my experience of the SIPS conference is you end up sitting down with people and you actively work on projects with them. So you can start collaborations at the meeting itself rather than it being what I've seen as a more, let's say, pessimistic networking approach, which is basically, I've heard that these senior famous people are at these conferences. Maybe I can try and bump into them and hopefully that will help my career. Like, that's a very different kind of networking. And I think,
which also obviously won't happen because those senior people have their friends and they're going to be going to lunch and dinner and drinks with their friends and not with random grad students.
Yeah, which is also
why in those traditional conferences, which is very different at these more non-traditional conferences.
Yeah, again,
where you can make friends with the real adults.
Didn't this thing go around on Twitter a while back where somebody said your H index should be printed onto your badge so they know they're not wasting their time? I'm pretty sure it was a joke, but it made the rounds because some people, I think, believed it. Maybe it was even meant seriously.
There was I think it was a predatory conference that somebody shared a screenshot of before where the order of the speakers was ordered by H index.
Oh God!
Which, like, clearly it was I hope clearly, although maybe sometimes the boundary is a bit more blurred. It was a predatory conference, but at the same time, like, there are people that believe in that. Like, we think it's ridiculous, but that is the accumulation of, prestige, numbers, blah blah.
We think it's ridiculous, but we also know that lots of hiring decisions and promotion decisions, that kind of stuff are.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I have to admit, my most valuable networking, I think, was just standing together with other PhD students in coffee breaks and just either nerding out about our topics or just having small talk and kind of connecting on Twitter afterwards. And then you have this kind of network with other people who are interested in the same stuff.
And obviously that's going to be the most valuable network as well, right? Like the value is the sort of the network of your actual peers, because they're going to be the ones going through the same kind of things as you are. They're going to be the ones more likely to be open to collaborating with you. And you're also the ones more fun to collaborate with, probably, on average. So, you're very right. I agree. Yeah. So what kind of conferences have you guys been to? And what has your experience been like? at them?
I've been to now 2 physical conferences. One was in 2019, like 2 months after I actually started my PhD program. And that was great, just standing together with other very young researchers, with researchers who had just published their first paper. Also kind of seeing the bigwigs in the field in person. Just standing there looking like normal human beings and giving pretty shitty talks. Really put stuff into perspective.
Okay, that's a strong advantage of going to conferences.
Yeah, you see the human side of people who somehow publish 20 papers a year. And then, for some reason, no physical conferences happened for a while. And the same conference, but then online, where for me it was just this really stark contrast of, you're not meeting anybody. The closest interaction you have is asking a question in the chat and then the person trying to answer the question. That's it. And then in late 2021, I was at a very small conference, Interactive Narratives, kind of an adjacent area to mine, which was very small. I think there were like 50 people maybe, which is great because you could distance and wear masks and everything. And again, this was really this very nice getting together, talking to interesting people, seeing papers that you otherwise wouldn't be interested in because you read the title and think, this sounds like I could spend my time in a better way. And then there was the hybrid conference in May this year, which I was there on hybrid. The thing turned out to be kind of a super spreader event because it was in New Orleans and the US is but as far as I know, all mild cases and stuff. But yeah, I think at this point, this is also kind of a thing we have to keep considering, right? What is the health risks of traveling? But yeah, overall, my physical experiences were quite good. SIPs I only ever
Sorry,
been
that sounds...
virtually, so.
I am 13, sorry. Sam, how's your physical experiences been?
Very mixed, I think. So like the first couple of SIPs in person were great because it was exactly the meeting people, working on things. Like if you want to call it networking, the whole thing was networking, right? It's meeting people you're going to work on things in the future. I mean, Thought Project happened from SIPs, and then from another SIPs it grew, and it wouldn't be here without that. So some really great things have come out of those kinds of conferences. But I've also been to conferences where, like, clearly some conferences are to make money, right? Like it's fine for the society, et cetera, but holding it at an expensive hotel and all of that it's such a money generating thing. And then when it's organized poorly on top of that. So I've been to poster presentations where, this is me trying to do visuals over audio, it's going to be great, where you have posters presented in almost like a triangular formation or like a zigzag, but then also against walls. So if you want to see a poster, you basically have to be 2 foot away from it. And to me, that's not about sharing work and sharing posters and actually encouraging mostly junior researchers to share their work. It's, I don't know, maybe it's just the organization side, but to me that speaks to, I don't know, some people need to have some kind of presentation to get funding, so that's how it's kind of arranged. But otherwise, sometimes it just feels like, okay, we can put more butts in seats, essentially, if we have these other formats, and then it's not doing the job that I think it's supposed to do. And that's where maybe a few of those kind of experiences, or just sitting through talks that, again, I've kind of gone, well, I could have napped for 2 days and got just as much out of some conferences. And it's fine, I guess, but also like that was flights, that was taxpayer money going into grants to get me there and stuff. And I think, do you know what? If that money was saved, you could have 5 or 6 smaller specialist meetings, for example. in which that sounds more like Jan's, with 50 or so people in the room that are experts in something, or like that's their interest, and then you can get lots of stuff out of that, as opposed to big giant, I don't know.
Like, I agree with you, because you mentioned the sort of absurd cost of these conference hotels. I have thought before that, because I've not, but I have thought before that kind of way of doing conferences is a bit like academic publishing, where somehow these academic societies got into something where they're really being ripped off. I mean, you saw that with COVID, where lots of them had to then happen anyway, or they had to happen in 2021 at the venue planned for 2020, because otherwise they would have lost like hundreds and thousands of insert currency here. And that's obviously quite wild. And then also in terms of the poster sessions, I do think that can depend on the field that you're in as well. Because I've done poster sessions in different fields and at philosophy science conferences as well. And because it's relatively new there, you actually get professors doing that as well. And that means that everyone takes the poster session seriously. And I had a much better time presenting my poster for 3 hours than I've ever had giving a talk.
I find poster sessions so uncomfortable. Like, you're walking through, looking at a poster, and next to it is a very eager person looking at you, waiting for a question, and you can just nod and, yeah, this sure is a poster. Sorry, from afar it looked like it is interesting, but this is totally not my area. I'm now going.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm too sort of blunt to find that really, really awkward. Like, I'm both fine with standing by a poster and having someone come close to it and going, sorry, I thought this was something else. And with being the person who sort of looks around and, well, having said that, obviously I have stood at posters before because it looked like the person had not talked to anyone all night. And you're a bit like, no, please tell me about this research that I have nothing to do with, so that you're not so sad.
That's been my challenge. I've had to very much take a Sam bite your tongue approach, because if I don't fully understand, or not understand, if it's not my area, then naturally my questions end up being more methodological or statistical, which quite often are like the dick questions to ask when you're standing at a poster. So it's like, I mean, especially for me, right? It's like, your measures aren't reliable. How can you gain? Like, it's really hard not, like, I've never said anything that brutal, again, because I don't say anything, because I don't know how to word these things in, like, the nice way. And it should be.
But what you want to say is...
And it's not that I want to, like, tear down or anything like that. That's not what it's for. But sometimes, like, I'm curious why you did this, can also not be the nicest thing for particularly very junior people to face, because then it's like, well, I spent weeks preparing a poster to get critiqued. Like, there should be some level of critique, right? It's understanding, but also it can really easily be a very negative experience for folk. So trying to avoid that.
I mean, with talks as well, right? I listened to talks where I was, the whole talk through, I was thinking, oh God, this person is about to start crying any second now. And because they were just so stressed by the whole thing. I think at least now we are moving towards, if you want, you can just have a video presentation, which I think for many people would be great. And afterwards, then you have sometimes you just get questions where, I remember what somebody once asked the speakers, if you have too many people, you can make every result significant. If you have too many participants. They had 30 people.
Oh.
it was
fun.
So was that question related to that particular talk, or?
Yeah, they said, we have significant results here and here, like we have a significant increase in memory retention, and this person, afterwards said, but
ginormous sample.
Yes, if if you have too many people, you can make everything significant.
Oh, wow.
So I have a question about that. Well, it's more of a comment than a question.
Oh, nice. That's a very nice segue to talking about that.
We can do that. Can senior people not be dicks at conferences? Can that be my take home? Like, there's no need for for any of that. No, if it's not your presentation, I'm just going to rant. Why not? If it's not your presentation, no one needs to hear 5 minutes of your latest book. Just stop it. If it's more of a comment, then have a chat with the speaker afterwards. Like, if the question or the comment's not going to help the understanding of the audience, does it really need to be that way?
But if you're not a dick after a presentation, how can people know that you're senior?
Oh.
I'm not sure if it's just senior academics, but yeah.
It's not necessarily
like if you're talking just about comments, then I'm, yes, like what's the point? Like you're holding things up, and it's very difficult for the person if there's a person moderating to deal with that, especially if they're junior and the person going on and on is senior. But if it's, I'm a bit more unsure about critical questions. I guess it depends on the venue, on the context, how critical you can get, because it would be a shame if it really was just, because if it really is just an advertisement session and no one's allowed to ask any critical questions, because that would then tear the person down immediately rather than it being about doing things better. Then I'm going very far into the conference's nay.
There's very much like there's field norms, right? So, like you say, there's some spaces where the discussion is intended to be like a discussion and a critique and sort of building that forwards, whereas in other ones, like clearly it's 5 minutes to try and get extra context or extra information about the presentation or ask questions, and it's, I don't know, there's critique and then there's, I don't know, capital C critique, right? I guess, and although sometimes it's hard to see the difference, like when you see the difference, it's stark, I think, in a lot of cases.
So the skill of seeing the difference between a critique and a critique is more of an artisan kind of flair.
It's a humanities thing, I think.
No, sorry, I was making a reference to like these, like if you feel at replicating something, then you're just lacking flair.
Oh yes.
So if you can't see the difference between a critique and a critique, then that's just sorry. Has anyone's mind been changed from their initial? So initially we had a yay-ish from Jan, a nay-ish from Sam, and somewhere in between from me. Have you guys changed your mind? Jan, do you want to start again?
I would hate myself if I wouldn't bring this up more explicitly. Like, there is this massive inequality, right? If you have a small child at home and you don't have anybody to give that child to during the time you would be away, and if you have to bring the child with you, if you have physical or mental barriers that just hinders you to fully partake in an in-person conference, and if at the same time a conference is the main
visa
event
restrictions or like all kinds of
I mean, just if the building isn't wheelchair accessible, most basic thing you would think, right? You immediately, if you're a wheelchair user, you have a massive problem. And if at the same time, like a conference is the main event in your field, the main way to interact, the main event where things happen, and you cannot go there, you are out of the eyes of that field for at least a year if you can come next year. So it's great if you can be there, but if the drawbacks of not being there, if the punishment for not being there is so great, we definitely need to have other things as well.
So that's for your field in particular, yeah?
Yes, where it is such a central element. I wish it would be more accessible, but also it's great when you can be there.
So it's still a yay with conditions.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
Like if it would be the only way, get rid of conferences and then we would be more equitable, throw them out immediately. Though I would kind of be sad.
I mean, I think I'll just I'll just go next because I think I'm probably closer to Jan than Sebastian. I agree. So I think conferences if put on in a way that as many people as possible can participate, and given lots and lots of caveats, basically, I'm a big fan of conferences. Yeah. But also, yeah. So I think, I'm still between yay and nay. I don't want to fully say yay, but.
Yeah. I mean, I think you summarized it really nicely earlier, that it's, if one-on-one someone was to say, I have the funds from my studentship, grant, whatever, to go to this conference, should I go? Assuming that it's relevant, et cetera, then I'd say, yeah, go. But then it's that, like, on a... It's
also a great opportunity to try, like, I've all of my non-European travel I've done was paid by universities.
Yeah.
Or, like, funders. Like, exclusively. I've never gone like further than so, right? That's fantastic. That's great fun.
Yeah, on a personal level, it's great, right? And that's I think I find it really hard to not. I don't mean this in like some kind of bullshit virtue signaling kind of way, but it's really hard to see that, like, as soon as you say personal benefit, that means that a lot of people don't get that benefit, right?
Yeah.
And it means that they might even have everything in place, but just universities are so terrible at reimbursing money that you might not be able to go, or you might put yourself in financial difficulty to be able to go. And I think at those points, if it was purely about kind of going somewhere as a mini holiday where you can talk about research as well, great. But it's not, right? As Jan said, if it's about something that might also influence the way that you're seen and assessed in your field, that it influences your CV, it likely influences the opportunities that you get in the future, then I don't know, that again, they're great on an individual basis if you can go, but for all of the, I don't know, maybe it's not the most open thing in open science / scholarship, right? It very much hits that. Who is it open for? And it's the same people that it's always been open for. And
yeah, I think I would go as far as maybe saying that if your conference, if it's a conference that's meant to be a bigger conference, cannot provide funding for early career researchers or other unfunded or like underfunded researchers, then maybe it shouldn't be put on at all.
So you say it's a systemic thing, right? It's individual benefit versus systemic issues, and I'd say we're all in a quite lucky position that we've been able to go. We've had the opportunities. There's also people that are self-funded, right, throughout studies at the start of things, and it's hard. I like conferences. I would like to see them both more equitable and better, to really live true to what they promise to be for more people.
Yay! That's a very nice way of finishing. Sorry, I ruined that by saying yay like that. But yes, Sam, you win.
That's okay. You win. I'm gonna take that little snippet and just have it. Like, that can be my, like, your code ran effectively thing. Yay, you did it! We all need to reinforce each other more positively more often.
Exactly. That's how it works.
Sophia.
Well, thank you guys so much for this nice chat about conferences, and
likewise.
I hope we can maybe continue this discussion with anyone who's listening online, and let us know what you think. Now I feel like I'm a YouTuber going, like and subscribe.
Buy our merch.
But genuinely, like, we'll have not considered so many things because we are not because we're necessarily dicks, but because we're finite human beings. So let us know what really obvious, glaringly obvious thing we've not taken into consideration.
And then we'll revisit and see how accurate our yays or nays are.
Exactly. Say something that makes someone. No, I think we all won in this episode.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't even talked about that some people are just not safe to be around.
Oh, we have not talked about that. We've very nicely not talked about that. Ooh. All right, on that note.
Yay! We did it.
Oh, God.
Oh, God. See ya. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording. Should I edit that out?
No.
Hi, post-recording Jan here. As soon as we had stopped recording, we did realize we hadn't discussed all the potential problems that can arise when people from all over the world are tossed into the same space. From fiction caused by different cultural norms, backgrounds, and language uses to conference organizers and participants allowing spaces to become, or themselves making them unsafe. However, to some degree, we are not really the right people to adequately discuss this. Still, in future, we want to come back to this, probably including the topic into a wider discussion of how the academic community does or does not deal with people and practices that make our shared spaces unsafe and hazardous. Until then, please feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments or by writing us. And now, back to the regular outro. See ya. You listen to Reproducibility Season 2, Episode 4, Conferences, Yea or Nay? Your hosts this episode were Sophia Crevel, Sam Parsons, and Jan Vornhagen. On Twitter, you can find them as @Crevelli, @Sam_D_Parsons, and @VornhagenJB. This episode was produced by Sophia Crevel and Sam Parsons and edited by Jan Vornhagen. For more information and to get involved, please visit reproducibility.org. Thank you for listening.